Streaming services are on the rise, and brick-and-mortar video stores are a thing of the past. We have lost that experience of wandering the aisles and stumbling upon a film we've never heard of. We have replaced the familiar face behind the video store counter with an algorithm to recommend films. With more and more content available, it's harder to know what's worth watching and what might be a waste of your time. There are many hidden gems out there waiting to be discovered, and we want to help you find them. This is Trailer Rewind, a podcast where we discuss and review recently forgotten or overlooked films that are now available to stream at home. JJ, today we have our third bird-titled film, The Peanut Butter Falcon.
There's sheep in this world, and there are wolves in this world. And I know that you two boys are just two weary travelers who lost your way. So, we're gonna clean you up right with a baptism.
I'm more a baptism by fire type.
Okay.
Come to my wrestling school and become a badass.
That's what he wants to do with the rest of his life.
Yes, it is.
You let a half-naked boy with Down syndrome who has no idea how to get along in this world just slip out from under your nose. You two are close.
We are.
Well, then you'll figure out where he's at and you'll bring him back.
Are you following me?
Maybe we could be friends and buddies, bro dogs, and chill. Have a good time.
So the wrestling school's in Aiden?
Yes.
One long road leads all the way down. I'll drop you there then.
I'm looking for a missing person. Have you seen him?
Little man on a lamb. Met your girlfriend back there, Eleanor. Two bandits on the run.
Oh, yeah!
Rule number one, don't slow me down. Rule number two, I'm in charge. Hey, what's rule number one?
Party.
No, not party.
Today is May 11th, 2021, and The Peanut Butter Falcon is available on Hulu and Amazon Prime. So, The Peanut Butter Falcon was released into theaters in the U.S. on August 9th, 2019. It was a small initial release, just 17 theaters. So, I mean, just very few places you could find this. It slowly expanded, and just over a month later, it was in nearly 1,500 theaters. So, this was a film that had a lot of endurance. It left theaters in December. So from August 9th to December 19th, 2019, that's 4 months in theaters. And during that time, it made over $20 million. Not bad for a little movie with a $6 million budget. But the Falcon...
that's endurance. That's great.
Yeah, and the Falcon didn't land there. It also opened globally in the fall of 2019, making another $3 million internationally. It performed really well in Germany and Belgium, where it made over $500,000 in each of those countries. It then took the typical route of being available to purchase digitally. That was November 9th, 2019. And then physical formats 1 week later. So, right around, I think they wanted to get this out for, I guess, Christmas, people being able to pick it up if they wanted to. Sure. But this is the path of success that is, I think, the bellwether for an independent film. If you start small and you're able to scale up and you have that momentum, you grow big, you stay in theaters a long time, that word of mouth slowly builds, gives it that long life, and then you make that transition to, home video and all that. It reminds me of what we would see with independent films like back in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. You'd get a couple of these every single year of a film with recognizable faces. There was something unique about it, but it felt really small, and you never knew, is this going to be a good movie or not? And then suddenly word of mouth, and everybody's talking about it, and it's in theaters all over the place all of a sudden. That's one thing in this movie that makes it feel like it's from a different era, because we don't see that often anymore. You don't get films this small of a budget getting that wide of a release anymore. And
what'd you say, mid-90s, right? That's how it feels?
Yes, exactly. And the story as well.
Well, I think, we do so many of these smaller films, right, in Trailer Rewind, that I wonder now, knowing, and we've looked at so many of the different paths to success, like you're talking about for independent films, you got to wonder if there's some sort of algorithm or some sort of a formula that they've set up in terms of how much money it made in those 17 theaters when it opened, to say, okay, now we've graduated to the wider release, now we've graduated to this kind of thing. You wonder if there's some sort of like a way to decide whether or not we can make money going forward that these kind of films graduate to as they open wider and wider. I think that's an interesting thing to check out.
Yeah, I think, back in the days when you had to, make prints of films, there was definitely a cost to that. So, okay, we're in 17 theaters, we're going to go to 50. Okay, what is the cost to create those additional prints to get them shipped out to those theaters? And that is a cost that they'd have to account for. So, yeah, clearly there's a number. And knowing the way that, industries work, once a model gets set, it's going to take a lot to shift that. So even now, it's digitally, it doesn't cost you anything that much more to put it in 5 theaters versus 500 or 5,000. You're not making prints, you're not shipping things. But I think there's still probably that cost of we've got to get the theater space. So there's probably an algorithm. You're right. And usually I think it's the word of mouth that they're going to count on that, because how many people do we get in the seats? Are people talking about it? What are all those factors that they look at? And in 2020 and 2021, we don't have that anymore. This was right, at the end of 2019, probably one of the last films that we'll see for a while that is going to do that very small opening and then grow to such a wide release, because anything in early 2020 didn't have that time to blossom like that. So I think of this as being sort of the last that I'm aware of this type of film doing that small release and growing really big, because I remember
it feels like that.
This was all over the place. People were talking about this. Our own Pete Wright picked this as his Instagram pick. So it's
exactly.
something
recommendation.
A recommendation there. So this is that type of film that builds on the word of mouth. The other thing that makes it feel like it's from a different era is there's something about the story. It's that road trip buddy movie, just sort of all-American story. The film itself on its website calls it compares it to like a Mark Twain story. It's got that a Mark Twain style adventure story is what they call that. And it reminds me of those stories that before there was young adult literature, your Mark Twain, your Jack London, these just like, all-American adventure stories of being out in the wilderness, on the road, the interesting characters you meet. It reminds me of like middle school, that just something about stories like this that you would either read or it would be a movie or something you'd see. It just felt like that. And I don't recall seeing something like this in a long time. It's a
classic script. It's a classic story.
Yes, very much. I'm like this. I'm surprised by, turns of events, but I know where it's going. I know what types of conflicts or how dark this is going to get or how violent it's going to get. I know where it's going to stay in this nice little family zone. And there's not a lot of films like this. And
it is family, but we should also say that it's very, it does get dark. It it is dramatic. Yeah. So it's the kind of thing too, where it's heavy. So it's all of the things that we're saying. It's this classic story. It's a buddy film. There are light-hearted moments, but there's also a lot of drama to this particular film that should be respected as well if you're going to choose it to watch.
Oh, yes.
Because
it is PG-13.
Yeah, there could be some... I hate the concept of a trigger warning, but there could be something that people should know. You're going to be faced with some things that are hard. They're drama. Yes. You have to like drama to be able to check out this movie.
Yeah, and that was the thing that after I finished watching it, I thought that was PG-13. Well, yes, it's on the lighter end of PG-13 because we've got PG-13 that is like, how is this not R-rated? This is at the opposite end of the spectrum. There's smoking, there's some of those other things, there's some swearing, there's some, I think they call it adult themes, some heavier, drama to this that's going to make it not for young kids, but parents, be cautious about this one. Probably watch it first before, watching it with your kids so that you've got a sense of, is this going to be appropriate? But it is something that I think the entire family can sit down and watch together because it does appeal to just the general sensibilities of a great road trip story.
Yeah, totally agree.
So when I was thinking about this film, I'm like, who would I recommend it for? Well, clearly I'm not going to recommend it to Pete because he's already seen it. But it's like, I remember when I was, I must have been about 11 or 12. There was a Disney movie called Never Cry Wolf with Charles Martin Smith. And he's a scientist that goes up to the Arctic because they think that the wolves are killing off some of the other wildlife. So they're concerned about the wolves, causing disruptions to the environment. I think there's some ranchers up there, and they're worried about the wolves. And the scientist goes up there because he's going to try to find out like what's going on with these wolves. And he finds out that the wolves are living off like these mice. That's what their main source of food is, these mice. And so it's just Charles Martin Smith in the wilderness with woods. It's a Disney, movie. So, but as a kid watching that, it was one of those first not kids movies that I remember watching, because the main characters were adults. They weren't kids. They're dealing with semi-heavy issues because he's got confrontations with some of the locals, and there's guns, and there's threats to his safety. And I remember just really enjoying it because it wasn't so scary or so over my head, but it wasn't little kid stuff anymore. And so I really enjoyed that because I felt like, I'm watching something that adults watch. And this had that feeling for me too of a good transition from watching, movies that are targeted towards young children to ones that can talk with you straight on about some fairly heavy stuff, but not getting too overly burdened by it, not getting too in deep with some of the subjects. And it's something we can talk about further on when we delve a little bit deeper about the characters and some of their past and what's going on there.
It's interesting that you kind of put it in the context of with kids. My kids are 9 and 11. I don't think I would introduce them to this movie yet. I don't think they're ready for it. But that's the thing. I mean, you talk about it being on the lighter side of PG-13. It is, but that sort of the depth, they wouldn't be able to keep up with this movie in terms of the emotional depth that is required of it. And that's why I guess I kind of really lean towards the heavy side of drama. When you talk about who you're going to recommend it for, it really has to be someone who is going to appreciate the deep emotional turns that are coming here and the intensity of the drama that's going to happen here. And that is for some people. Some people, especially if you're trying to find an escape from effects heavy movies, and trying to find something that's really about the story of people and the hardships that people go through. I compare this to a movie like Hillbilly Elegy, but to bring that up, I think this movie is far superior to Hillbilly Elegy, and that's kind of my point in bringing it up. I think everybody knows about Hillbilly Elegy. Not as many people know about Peanut Butter Falcon. I think this would be for that same kind of people. If you like those kind of films, you're going to like this one.
Yeah, I would say that's a fair comparison because tonally, I think it's in the same place. You've got sort of that coming of age aspect of dealing with difficult challenges in life, but not in a way that's overly melodramatic. I would say that's, yes. If you liked Hillbilly Elegy, I think you'll really like Peanut Butter Falcon.
You'll think that this may be your favorite movie if you liked Hillbilly Elegy, for sure. I'm very serious. I think after watching them both, that's how I feel about it. So.
Okay, so then let's talk about ratings where this one falls because
I wanted to say it's such an interesting story because all of my bird movies came right in the same place. So the Peanut Butter Falcon for me ends up at 90 of 254, and that's the top of the three bird movies, which is right below Contagion. And honestly, you've got two Steven Soderbergh movies right in front of it, and he's my favorite director. So that it's hard to bust that through that anyway. But I've got the Peanut Butter Falcon, I've got the Goldfinch next, and then the Hummingbird Project below. And really, honestly, they were all kind of the same in terms of rating for me too. I think they all were right around 3 stars. Mm-hmm. I didn't like the Goldfinch. I did like Hummingbird Project, and I did like Peanut Butter Falcon too. So it's 3 stars and a like, and that's right where it says it belongs on my Flick chart as well. 90 out of 254 at 65%.
Okay. So I went slightly higher. I went with 3.5 stars. There was something about this. It wasn't going to make it to 4, but there was something a little bit more about it. And it may be the fact that I guess overall, see, I keep saying it's lighter, but it's not. But there's something about it that just felt more uplifting overall in terms of the main story, because in the Goldfinch, I mean, we talked about just what a downer that is
totally
the whole way.
No redemption.
And there, as our buddies are sort of on the road, you've got those lighter fun moments, some of those montages. There's things that you can laugh at, and for that it raised it above that. And Hummingbird Project is great, but it plays it really straight, really serious. There's not a lot of laughs in there, and I felt like the emotions were more varied in this one. And for me, that put it at 3.5.
When you picked a series of bird films, I had no idea that I would feel so similarly about all three, and that they were all. I mean, they're all dramas, right?
Yes.
They were all bird themed. They're not even themed. They're actually bird named. We should just call them bird named dramas that kind of fall in this category. But for me, they all ended up in the same place. Yeah. I think it's interesting. They all ended up being the same kind of movie, the same genre of film for me.
Yes. And so it came in a really weird spot on my flick chart. It came in at 187 out of 723, just below Social Network, which is really strange place because I would not put those films on par with each other. And then just above The Witch, not your film. Don't watch. I'm sure you know not to watch The Witch. But in terms of, I think it's the emotions that, as I was rating, I just said I felt good watching this movie. I think that's what put it up a little bit higher than some of the other things. But clearly, Social Network is a masterpiece, and I wouldn't say they're equivalent, but there was something that was more affirming in this story for me that put it up a little bit higher than the others. So that's
fair.
The Peanut Butter Falcon does have a weighted average review on Letterboxd of 3.85 based on 82,000 reviews. And at IMDb, it's actually at 7.6 stars at IMDb on 70,000 ratings. Yeah. So it's up there. I think people were responding positively, something again that they probably haven't seen like this in a while. And I think we'll get into that. But listeners, if you think this is your kind of film and you don't want anything spoiled, this is your chance to pause the podcast and check out The Peanut Butter Falcon on Hulu or Amazon Prime. Let's get the chocolate and the peanut butter and your peanut butter and my chocolate. Let's get falcons flying.
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Atomic Throws.
Atomic Throws. Well, yes, this is a film that, as I started, I thought, okay, I didn't know anything going in, really. I probably had seen a trailer maybe a year ago. I just knew
the
cast.
Shia and Zach. That's who I knew was in it, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So right off, we're introduced to our two main characters. We see Zach. He's escaping from an old folks' home. We see his little...
Which he doesn't belong in.
No,
let's just say.
No, he doesn't.
A Down syndrome... And he's not a kid, but he's a Down syndrome young man.
True,
right?
Yes,
a young man with Down syndrome does not belong
in an old folks' home.
Elderly home.
No.
Yeah, exactly.
No. So he's got his whole plan to escape, which abruptly fails. He gets tackled on his way, just outside the front door. But we get the sense of... Here's a man who's stuck someplace that he wants to get out of. We see that, right away. That's the first thing we know about him is he wants out. So we're given his motivation right away. And then we get to meet Tyler, who, Shia LaBeouf, who is out there just on the river and he's collecting crab from the crates and whatever. And we see as he's going about his business, he comes along to collect crabs and he sees some type of some type of law enforcement related to boats, fishing, something. Yeah. He takes a quick U-turn and then we find out a little bit about his story and this is something I didn't know, that there's only a certain amount of permits for crabbing. And so his brother had one, something happened with his brother. Some other people have his permit. He feels like it's his, there's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of stuff packed into his story at the beginning there.
Well, in the first third of this movie, he's not a good person. He's a bad person.
Right.
And they don't explain to us any of his motivation. They explain it to us over the course of the film. But they really, he's a bad dude. He's not a good person at all.
No, because he's stealing from other men that are, working to make ends meet. Then he burns their stuff, takes off on the water. So we've got our criminal on the run. We've got our, wants to escape. And so, of course, they're very quickly going to cross paths. But what was great about Zach and his escape is you've just got a small little bit with Bruce Dern as his roommate.
And Bruce Dern was great.
Just a couple of scenes, just, a very few minutes with him helping Zach escape because he doesn't want him there. He knows he doesn't belong. Zach watches his wrestling tape of the, what is the wrestler's name?
Saltwater Redneck.
Saltwater Redneck. Yes, he watches that Saltwater. He's like, we've seen this 10 times today. So you understand, this Zach does not belong there. So he's aided in his escape with that great old trick of you take some some fabric and you tie it around the bars and you take a stick or a bar and you just crank that and those bars will slowly bend themselves back based on the laws of physics. He soaps himself up, slips out, and you've got Zach, a man with Down syndrome, in his tighty whities just running down the street in the middle of the night.
Actually, a pretty great shot. Pretty memorable shot.
Yes.
And done really well, too.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I do want to say this is something that I looked into my research before we get too far into the story. I did want to mention that this film was recognized by the Rudderman Family Foundation. This film was honored with its seal of authentic representation for accurate depictions of people with disabilities. Because I know that's one of those things where, okay, when you're going to cast somebody with Down syndrome, how are you treating that character? What story are you telling? And so to know that the Rudderman Family Foundation, this is one of their areas of priority, is looking at people with disabilities, and that they recognize this film as being accurate. So I love people are concerned that they have no concerns about Zach and his story and all of that. That it's truly from the heart. With this.
Well, and it's good that you bring that up, because in the first third of the movie, I was a little concerned with that, right? Because we didn't know we didn't understand really what the treatment was going to be throughout the film, and there's a bit of some of the folks in the first third of the movie really feel like non-actors. Of course, Zach was found at a camp, and he told the filmmakers that he wanted to be a film star, and they actually created this movie around him, which I think is fantastic.
Yes.
But so you get that, and he does a fantastic job for that. But some of the other character actors, some of the other character parts, I also felt were played by some seemingly non-actors. One of the people, the person that Tyler's working for at the docks, a lot of the dialogue in the first third is really stilted, and I had this kind of feeling like, oh no, it is going to be something that was just made for the purpose of getting made. It definitely changes direction. The story really roots in and pulls in some really interesting things as you go forward. But that first third, it's really good that you bring up that seal, because that first third, you're not sure. And that could be just, from folks who are not disabled or who don't have experience with it. It could be my ignorance and me not knowing how to necessarily react to that. And so that could be purposeful on the part of the film too. But that first third was a little hard for me, but I really clicked in once we started moving forward with the adventure.
Yeah, I think once Zach and Tyler sort of connect, and Zach hides on Tyler's boat as Tyler sets fires to things and takes off and is hiding from sort of our villain, for lack of a better term, Duncan.
Air quote villains.
Yes, played by John Hawkes. So he's the guy who's been wronged by Tyler. And, this is the one thing that during the first third,
Duncan and Rat Boy wasn't that the other guy's name?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, let's figure out a good name for a villain. Duncan, and then let's make sure the other one's called Rat Boy.
Right. But the cast in here, this was the other thing that sort of put me at ease with this, is I was like, okay, it's easy to put Bruce Dern in a small little role, Shia LaBeouf, okay, great, with Zach. But we've also got Dakota Johnson as Eleanor, who is, works at the old folks' home. She's
like a social worker.
She is a social worker. She knows Zach doesn't belong there, but he's got no family. The system has no other place for him. She knows he's a flight risk and doesn't really know how to handle that. We've got Thomas Hayden Church as saltwater redneck. John Barenthal, we see in some flashbacks, as Tyler's older brother, John Hawkes. So these are all very recognizable faces. So I thought there's something that has drawn them to this story. So that sort of gave me hope along the way of, well, what is this story really going to be about? These people are signing up for something, so there's got to be something at the core of this story that's going to be worth my while when it comes to watching this movie. So that was one of the other pieces, because I did have concerns at first, because I thought, it's feeling a little rough to get going. But once we hit the water, we get the road trip movie, the buddy movie, the road buddy movie, I guess you call it, sort of kicks in, right? Because we've got two, at odds, Tyler doesn't want to be bogged down by Zach, who just sort of is a stowaway on the boat. Yeah. What are they going to have in common? How is this friendship going to develop? And for me, that was really the joy of the movie. It's that when you put people, I guess the Mark Twain adventure, similar to Huck Finn, of going down the river, you get these little episodes that you have the opportunity to put your characters in little short scenes of, what's this obstacle or barrier. Oh, they run into this person. What happens? So you've got these short little episodes, and it works really well, I think, for this story to keep you engaged, to keep you moving along with the characters. There's not a big, complex plot or story. I mean, it's really simple. And I think that's also one of the reasons I kept it at 3.5 stars, because everything is boiled down to sort of its most simple thing. We don't get into a lot about Tyler and his brother.
So,
yeah.
But are you saying that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Well,
because I think you could look at it either way.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
yes.
They don't need to necessarily tell us more. I would have liked to have, I would have been more, I would have had more affinity with Tyler had I known more about his backstory before we got into that. But that being said, I don't mind the way they told the story, because that simplicity that you're talking about actually made me like it more, because we didn't get caught up in, we compare it to the last couple, like the Goldfinch, obviously.
Right.
so many
much.
crazy
Yes.
stories and all this stuff. And even the Hummingbird Project, we get a little bit of sort of distraction as we're moving along in the story.
Yeah.
There's none of that with the Peanut Butter Falcon, and that's why it kind of leads up better. This is a much better. They give us pieces of the story as we go, and they kind of honor that simplicity, and so it was a positive thing for me. That's why I ask you.
No, it is positive, but it doesn't give the actors necessarily a lot to go with. We know that
Right.
Tyler, his brother had the permit, and we see lots of flashbacks with them together, and then we get a scene of they're out one night and Tyler's driving and he dozes off. So I mean, we don't get it. We don't get into anything else about that, but clearly we know that he's got some guilt over, clearly responsible for his brother's death. But we don't delve into that. We don't get into the depths of depression. We don't get into all of that. But it gives us something of, this is what has derailed his life, right? But I don't know how that connects into everything else that he's doing, like his quest to, it tells me he's a broken man, but that's all it serves as a purpose. Same thing we get a little bit about Eleanor much later in the story, that she was married, her husband died. We don't know much more about that, but it's just another, here's a broken person, here's this. And so that's sort of what I'm saying, is we don't get a whole lot of complexity in the characters and the relationships connected to the plot, and that's fine, because I don't need it to become an epic, sprawling, Southern Gothic tale of these, flawed people, but it just kept things simple, which I wanted a little bit more of. By the time we get to the end, have these characters resolve their issues or not? What's going on with Tyler? And by the time we get to the end, has he changed as a person? Do we see that? Does his guilt over his brother's death, is that gone? Is it still there? But that's not the questions the story wants to answer. And so that's sort of where I wanted a little bit more. And that's why I said it's sort of at my 3.5, because it just sort of keeps things simple,
Gotcha.
which is, again, great for a family movie, because you don't want to burden kids with, why does this guy have all these issues around his brother? It's like, no, you just need to know something bad happened and he's responsible. Keep it simple for the kids, I'd say, and for the story.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think of it as a kids movie, but I understand where you're going.
No, this movie is so much fun once we get on the road with these two. We get to learn a little bit about them. Once Zach finally gets clothes, because he's in his tighty whities for a good long chunk of this movie, as they're wandering around.
I wonder if Tyler had those clothes in his bag,
right?
Why did he wait so long to share it? But I don't know. That's a question for another day, I suppose.
Right, and that's where we start to learn a little bit about Zach's quest a little bit more. We learned, from when he was back at the home, that this saltwater redneck was his hero. He wants to go to this camp. He wants to learn how to wrestle. So that's his thing. So as he and Tyler start to connect over this whole journey quest. But I guess
that's the point. So the answer to my question, the reason why Tyler finally decides to give it, is once Tyler learns that Zach's on the run too, then he feels like he can trust him enough to give him clothes, which I think is,
that's true.
I guess we're both honor among thieves, right?
Right.
This is the kind of idea, but still
you're right.
Tough.
That's right, because they stop off they're on their way on foot. They stop off. Tyler goes into a little shop to get some supplies, and that's where he doesn't have a lot of money, because he brings a bunch of stuff up to the counter. He's got to scale it back, and as he's talking with the proprietor there and drinking some homemade moonshine, that's when Eleanor comes in, and with her photo, we've seen her around town trying to see if anybody's seen Zach, and that's when Tyler learns that Zach is a fellow fugitive. So they develop their secret handshake, and their bonding begins as they move on their journey down to Florida, which is, along the way. And I guess he sees Zach. He can get Zach to where he wants to be, drop him off there, and then continue on to Florida for his new fresh start.
Yeah, and so I didn't get emotionally connected to the film until we get some distance into that road trip. And the point, I actually know exactly where I started getting emotionally connected to it, because they start dropping in, like you said, you see the background, Tyler's background, and the bad things that happened to him in the past. But the point that I got emotional is when Tyler decides to teach Zach how to swim. I don't know why that was such a big scene for me. Most of the camera shots are down along the water, so you're kind of at their level as they're going through, what it takes to swim and all this stuff. And that was just a really heavy, positive, but sort of like renewing thing for me about those characters, because before I didn't really care about them except for this kind of this bond that they've forged. But I thought they were just kind of both on the run and not necessarily good characters until that moment when they shared that. That's when it made emotional sense for me in the movie.
Yeah, that's where the buddy nature of it comes. It's not just two guys that happen to be traveling the same way, but they've now developed a relationship with each other. That's right. Especially for Tyler, because you get the sense that it's like, okay, I can help Zach, because to not help Zach, I mean, what kind of a person are you? So there's that piece, but then it becomes, he's much more invested. And we really get that, I think, once Eleanor finds them. We have that whole scene where, where the peanut butter falcon is born at night as they're talking about wrestling, and a drunken night, Eleanor stumbles across them the next day. Zach throws her keys into the water, so her vehicle is gone, so she's now stuck with them, and they're out on their raft, and Tyler asks her some really challenging questions of why she treats Zach the way she does, and he really causes her to reflect and question on how she perceives him. And for me, that was a really crucial scene in the story. I mean,
that alone probably earned them the seal. I mean, yes, honestly, the seal from the Ruderman. I mean, yes, that was a really powerful scene about about a person being seen for being a person and not for the disease that they have.
Right.
I think, or the condition they have. I think that's really, really important. That was a great scene.
Yeah. And they kept, it takes quite a bit of tact to do this, because they've got to have their conversation. Clearly, Zach can't be listening, so it's, hey, Zach, why don't you practice holding your breath? And he's off the side of the raft with his head in the water. And I thought, okay, that's clever. But then they wrap it up with, he's actually grabbed a fish out of the water. So, so it ends, you've got that heavy scene, it ends on a laugh. There, it's that.
Well, I
balance.
like the first time he comes up, he goes, "How long was that?" And Tyler says, "Long."
Yes, yes, and it's
good stuff.
It's that craft in the writing that keeps this from becoming too heavy or too. It just strikes the right balance. I will say to that, because you can have that intense conversation. Where do you go from there? You got to lighten it up, and so we then have that shift from Eleanor, because her whole thing has been, Zach can't be out in the world. He's got to be someplace, where people are taking care of him. And that perspective shifts. And that's where they then, along the way, they're at a diner. She checks in with her boss to let him know that she's found Zach. And I think this is sort of where the other shoe drops for her, is because she'd labeled him a flight risk at the old folks' home, the place that he's going to be put is a place that's for drug addicts and prostitutes. And she is that is not the right place for him. And you only hear her side of the phone conversation. She's like, well, yes, I did say he was a flight risk, but clearly the system doesn't have a place for Zach. No. It does not know how to take care of someone like him. And that's the challenge. So she, finishes that phone conversation and asks the waitress if she knows Saltwater Redneck. And that takes us into sort of the third act of the film, of the dream fulfillment of the story of tracking down Saltwater Redneck. We get the disappointment of, dude, I haven't been doing that school in a long time, and I'm not doing that. Right. And then the dejected
scene too.
Walking away, and then all of a sudden the Camaro comes spinning through the dust and everything, and there he is with all his wrestling makeup on and everything, and to do the right thing, to help this kid have his one day of wrestling class. And
that's great.
No, it's great. I thought they're doing this out in the dirt. Is how somebody's going to get hurt, right? But we go along with it, and that's where we get the ultimate wish fulfillment of, hey, I know these guys doing some backyard wrestling. Do you want to be in a match for real? And that's at that point, my wife, who was semi-watching, said, "Oh no, he's going to hurt somebody," because we've had that Tyler's talked about how strong Zach is.
How strong he is. Yeah, exactly.
We've got that.
He's not going to know his own strength. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So we get to the wrestling match and my wife's like, he's going to hurt somebody. I'm like, no, it's not that kind of movie. It's not, It can't end tragically with like Zach, hurting, maiming somebody due to his strength. He said it can't go that direction. So I thought, how are they going to pull this off, right? How do you set up the wrestling match? Because we've learned that the atomic throw is not a real move. It was all trick photography and everything. And I thought, well, we got to get the atomic throw, right? So how
specifically said it was not possible.
Right, exactly. So how...
Not a real move. It's not possible. Is what they said.
So because we got to get an atomic throw in there. How does that happen? Well, of course, the guy that he's going to get matched up with, who is Saltwater Redneck's friend, is going to take it seriously and like, dude, I'm just, he's beating up Zach in the ring. And I thought, oh, okay, make this sort of side character really unlikable really quickly, gives us a motivation for Zach to execute the atomic throw. And the great thing about the casting is if you know your good old wrestling, that's Jake the Snake from the good old,
Oh, that is Jake the Snake?
Yes.
That's so great.
So you got a good old school wrestler in there for that that move. And yes, while we've got that going on, of course, we see that one of the attendees of the wrestling is one of the guys in Duncan's crew who calls Duncan to let him know that Tyler's there. Duncan has already told Tyler from a prior sort of confrontation, next time I see you, I'm gonna crush your skull with a tire iron. So when we see him get out of the car with that tire iron, for me, really powerful scene because of we move into slow motion of Zach picking up Sam as he's lifting him up. We see Duncan running, across the yard with his people. And so as we see Sam being tossed through the air, so Zach, pulling off the impossible move is then completely twisted around by Tyler getting a tire iron to the head, and then cut to black for a moment there. And that's where I didn't know where the film was going to go, because
and they did it to you on purpose, right? I mean, and then
we're in the hospital. We get flashbacks. Right. Is Tyler
but then they
alive?
Put him in the back seat.
Yes.
They put it. They hide him down below. Yes. It's a little bit for effect, but it works. It works. Hollywood. It did it.
It is. So they're on their road to Florida. So all three of them. So Eleanor has clearly quit her job.
It's a family.
Goes back to what Carl said at the very, very beginning of the film when he was talking with Zach about, family and how Zach has no family. And Carl told me, he said, friends are the family you choose. And for me, that was summarized right there. That's what this film is about, of somebody who does not have family, sort of building his own family.
I agree. And he found it. And they all found each other. Honestly, that's the thing. They all had their own drama too. We have, Tyler losing his brother. We have Eleanor losing her husband. They needed each other and they found each other. It's a beautiful, beautiful resolution to the story.
Yeah, it wraps everything up nicely. Like I said, I think it's that I knew they couldn't kill Tyler off. I mean, how injured was he going to be?
Didn't.
I thought
I was so scared
because
I was like, "Oh, did you really?"
Because
come on,
if Tyler dies, then Zach's going back to some home or whatever because Zach needs Tyler, right?
And then they get on the road, and then he's, you don't see Tyler.
Yeah.
I figured that okay, so Tyler, this is not right, but Tyler dies, so Eleanor then has the courage to then make the break and take it to Florida. So I'm glad they didn't do that, but in my mind, my sort of catastrophizing mind, I was like, oh gosh, no.
Yeah. Oh, that they were going to go in because Tyler had shared his dream of what he wanted, and they were going to go,
and they were going to fulfill his dream without him. It was tough.
Yeah, but I mean, we have our family, crossing the border into Florida. I have no idea what their plan is, but doesn't matter. I mean, they have no, I mean, Tyler's got no money. So unless Eleanor's like bankrolling whatever his, but again, not that type of movie. And I wondered if it touches on the edges of sort of like magical realism, fairy tale type of stuff, because it does handle things. So, I mean, it's heavy, but again, practically, if we were in gritty reality, it's like these three people, what are their chances of being successful? We're not on that grittier side of that. So it is that everything works out in the end type of ending. Although I still have questions of like, well, still, there's a case of arson that Tyler's responsible for destroying nearly $20,000 worth of equipment. Just because Duncan, put him in the hospital doesn't mean he's done,
Right.
But again, it's not that type of story. And again, that's what's really uplifting about this and why I consider it sort of like the family film, because it touches on a lot of things like bullying, talking about the character of Duncan. You can talk about Tyler, of making mistakes and how you handle guilt for a mistake that you made. And again, it's not anything that I think that we blame him for. It's he fell asleep. We don't have the whole, it wasn't like he was doing something wrong. Label that as an accident. We have the whole thing of Eleanor and her whole looking at Zach and how she perceives him as whether or not he can be, successful in the world, all of that. A lot of great talking points, I think, for families, to
she
look at
needed
something.
to learn that too.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And so for me, that's what makes this, of the three Bird films, yes, definitely my favorite, because it's ultimately, I think, rewatchable, some great talking points for families to get into, with, I would say probably 12, 13 is probably when you've got kids that are probably going to be...
Yeah, middle school into early high school. Yeah,
right.
I think that's good.
Sit down, have conversations, because these are going to be things that they're probably going to be dealing with. You've got that whole, dealing with guilt, dealing with bullying, dealing with people that aren't like you, people that are different, and how do you interact with them? Looking at Tyler and how he comes to accept Zach and be his biggest supporter and biggest fan. Even though, it would be easy for him to say, he's dragging me down. I've got my own thing to do. What responsibility do I owe to him? Nothing. But to me, it's this whole idea of like finding your family. So yeah, that's where I follow with this one. Yeah.
It did it.
It did it.
They found the family. It was wonderful.
Yes. So, I mean, other than like I said, that slow motion stuff at the end, there was, looking at what are the shots, the cinematography, some of the things.
Well, I mentioned the water scene. They do an amazing overhead shot with the big story moment when Tyler is pulling Zach across where he almost gets hit by the boat. That is pretty special too, and it's stationary, so it's a static overhead shot, which I actually think increases the drama too. That we aren't moving, we aren't zooming, we aren't moving at all. It's just held in place as the boat approaches. I thought that was really powerful. There also were some really great motion control stuff in the first third of the movie where we're following Tyler on the boat, and it's low, so it gives you a full shot of the boat, and you really feel the motion as we go with it. You would have needed some sort of boat to be alongside and shooting that as you go, and that was really beautiful stuff too. So I love that, and that stuff, it's not too crazy expensive. It doesn't take a whole lot of production, but it's the kind of creative stuff that you can do in a very practical way that makes it a really special movie. I really liked what they did with the camera in this movie.
Yeah, like I said, with everything about this film, like I said, other than a couple rough performances in the beginning, everything else just really clicked along. The pacing, the story structure moved it along. Really solid cast carrying us through, and camera work that I think worked, really well to help contribute to telling the story. So
I agree.
Yeah, it's just like I said, I wanted to give it 4 stars, and I just couldn't get there because I wanted more substance, but that's where I am in my life,
And I joked a little bit in the pre-show about it. I think I left it at 3 stars because for me, it's the perfect kind of movie. It's dramatic. It's a great story. It's something that's interesting. I don't really know who I'm going to recommend it to because again, you need to have an affinity towards some of that heavy, dark stuff to be able to see it. The other piece is that I don't think I'm ever going to see it again. I mean, I get it, and I can tell people the story of it like we're doing here today, but it's not something that I'm going to go revisit. So that's why it ended up at 3 stars, but definitely 3 stars and a like for me.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. It's not one that I'm probably going to watch again, but I would say a younger version of me might have really gotten into this film a lot. And it's one of these films where I look at Shia LaBeouf and I just cannot wrap my head around this guy of he's good at what he does. his personal life is just a mess. But, the fact that he commits to a project like this, and one of the other things that
he was great.
People didn't receive any Oscar nominations, but he and Zach were presenters at the 2020 Oscars. Clearly, the fact of the community of filmmakers coming around Zach to help tell this story, putting him in a movie, and some of the story elements coming from his own dreams. It's just one of those projects I thought it could come off so like cheesy Hallmark, but it comes off as such a great film that really succeeds. And so I'm not surprised that this is a film that started in 17 theaters and grew and stayed in theaters for so long.
I'm not surprised at that too either. I think the thing that freaks me out the most, I mentioned in the, when we were talking about ratings and stuff, I think this is a far superior movie to Hillbilly Elegy. And the fact that Hillbilly Elegy did get some Oscar nominations and this didn't, I think is kind of a tragedy, because they're the same kind of film in terms of, in looking at culture and all these kind of things. And I think the performances, I think this film is just superior to that. So that's just to reiterate, I think that if you like that kind of movie, you're going to like this one.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, that wraps up our trilogy of birds, our hummingbird, our goldfinch, and our falcon to finish things off. So we're going to delve into, I think, another trio of films, but it's, I've been playing around with titles. I got to dig back in and see how I group these three films, because I think it has something to do with maybe mental illness. I'm not sure. I have to look at where we're going with our next trilogy of films. But it's been a mixed bag, so far this run of stuff. But I'm glad to find something really solid like this with the Peanut Butter Falcon. Yeah,
good finale for the birds, for the Falcon.
All right, JJ. Well, pleasure talking to you. We'll see you next time.
See you on the next one.
At Trailer Rewind, I scour what is streaming to find the films we discuss on the show. Letterboxd makes it easy to find out which services have the films we are reviewing. Letterboxd also makes it easy to locate films we have watched in the past and see our reviews and ratings. The Next Reel team has built lists of films we have discussed for the main show, the film board, and Trailer Rewind. Right now we have a special offer for our listeners. You can quickly and easily upgrade your free Letterboxd account to Pro or Patron status with a 20% discount at thenextreel.com/letterboxd. If you've already upgraded your account, this discount also works for renewals. After you've used Letterboxd to find a film and watch it, we'd like you to be part of the conversation in our online Discord community. To get started, just go to thenextreel.com/discord. And to keep the conversations going and get some great benefits while you're at it, head over to thenextreel.com/membership and become a supporter of the Next Reel family of podcasts. For less than the cost of a movie rental, you can become a monthly supporter and join us for show live streams as we record, early access to shows in your very own personal podcast feed, and access to member-only channels in Discord. Thank you for listening to Trailer Rewind. Hondo.